The arrival of the wise men.
It was morning. I had recovered well from the birth, which, as I told you, hadn't been so difficult after all. The boy was alert, opening his eyes wide to gaze, still a bit awkwardly, at his father and me, as well as at the small objects we placed before him. He was as peaceful as a sunset on the Sea of Galilee and as beautiful as a full moon. We had plans, John, as I mentioned yesterday, to return to Nazareth and even intended to make a short stop in Ein Kerem, north of Jerusalem. To spend a few days with Zechariah, Elizabeth, and little John, but in the middle of that morning, I heard a great commotion in the village. Our dwelling was at the foot of the hill, on the opposite side from the road connecting Bethlehem to Jerusalem, but from what I could hear, something significant was happening in the village. I was alone, as Joseph had gone out to find work. Now, there was plenty of money circulating in Bethlehem because of the influx of outsiders, and many were taking advantage of it to improve their homes. Just then, my husband burst through the mat that served as our door, looking very agitated. "Some mysterious figures have just arrived in the village," he said, "in a caravan with camels and horses. They are asking about the Messiah. The whole village has gone out to greet them, and no one can tell them who the Messiah is." I found two of our shepherd friends, who looked worried, and I signaled them to be quiet. One of them went to find Rasan while I ran home. I don't know if we should flee or if we should let them find us. He was still speaking when a very well-dressed man appeared at our door. Behind him, at a short distance, was the shepherd who had suggested that our son was an impostor because he wasn't born with outward signs of greatness. Despite the warnings of the others, he had no hesitation in telling these noble gentlemen that he knew where the supposed Messiah was, and immediately, after receiving a bribe, he brought them to our house. I didn't know if what he was leading to our house was good or evil. He had done this out of spite and greed. But without knowing it, as happened years later with our poor Judas, he served God as an instrument. Again, crooked paths. Again, God was acting, extracting good even from sin. The fact is, he was right. The first to present himself was a servant. Soon, his masters entered. There were 3 of them, dressed in very different ways. One of them was the color of the Nubian slaves we sometimes saw in Roman retinues, but unlike the slaves, he wasn't ragged, he was dressed as elegantly as his companions. Joseph, as he always did in the face of danger, placed himself between the boy and me and asked them, without raising his voice but firmly, who they were and what they wanted. "We are wise men," they replied, "and we come from the east. In the lands from which this chosen and numerous people once came, we dedicate ourselves to studying the stars. We know the Most High God and worship only Him, even though we are not of your race. Therefore, Hamzas, one day we received a message from him that invited us to leave our land, as your father Abraham did, in search of someone who would reveal to us the fullness of wisdom. This someone could be none other than the King of the Jews, the descendant of David and the great Solomon. So we came to the capital, Jerusalem, and went to Herod's palace, supposing that it would be there, among his descendants, that Yahweh would have chosen the Messiah. Herod knows nothing and even asked us to tell him where the Messiah is so that he can also come to pay him homage and yield his throne to him. The wise men of Israel told us that it is in this village of Bethlehem, the birthplace of David, where prophecy says the Redeemer of the people will be born, and that is why we have come. Now, this man who is outside told us about the appearance of the angel to the shepherds and, although it seems to him that you are impostors, he agreed to show us the way.
We want to know if the Messiah is here, and if so, we ask that you let us see him, they said.
Joseph blocked their path, remaining silent and indecisive. Then I stepped forward, holding the boy in my arms, protecting him without hiding him. He is here, I said. I don't know if you will have the same experience as the shepherd who brought you to this house and be disappointed by his small appearance and our poverty. It's not our task to convince you of anything, because we didn't call you, nor do we need you. I only affirm that this is the Messiah. Whether you believe it or not is your own concern. At that moment, the boy opened his eyes and looked at them. I assure you, John, he did nothing more, not a single extraordinary gesture or anything inappropriate for a baby like him. But that look alone was enough for the three of them to fall to their knees simultaneously. Not only that. At that very instant, they began to weep. One of them, named Melchior, then said, calling me for the first time by the title that so many now give me, Lady, Mother of the Savior of Israel and of all nations, you cannot understand what we feel. We have spent our entire lives seeking wisdom. We sacrificed our youth and many opportunities for pleasure in this pursuit, and we consider it all worthwhile for the sake of achieving it one day. We are renowned not only in our own city but also in Greece, Rome, and even in distant India. Our friends are the most celebrated wise men in the world, and they consider us the foremost among them. Yet, what we have just seen is the undoing of our knowledge. Wisdom, most worthy lady, is not an idea, a thought, a concept that is grasped and formulated, with which one works day and night, turning it over and polishing it like rivers gently smooth stones with constant blows. Wisdom, lady, is a child. Wisdom is life. Wisdom is God remembering humankind and deciding to intervene again to help them. Wisdom is the love in this creature, so fragile that any tyrant could kill him, yet so powerful that, without violence, he can change the world. Love, noble lady, is the sum of all knowledge and the summary of all wisdom. And this, though neither you nor your husband knows it, is what you now protect in your arms. The wise men offered us gifts of great value and full of symbolism, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Their words confused me a little, and I later had much time to meditate on them, as well as on the fact that so many wept upon meeting my son. I was moved, though without any fear. The entire population of Bethlehem was crowding at the door of our house, having followed the foreigners, and only the servants of the three strangers managed to keep the people outside. Joseph invited them to sit on the benches he had made himself. They wanted to know everything, and we told them everything. They were increasingly amazed. Curiously, they too, like our shepherd friends and the old man Simeon in the temple, asked me to hold the boy in my arms for a moment. It was as if touching him irresistibly drew everyone to him. Caring for him, they said, is the best of gifts. Having been able to serve him for an instant, we already feel rewarded. They warned us of the fear that Herod inspired in them and that a noble Jewish elder, one of those who lived in the palace, had secretly advised them to evade the king's surveillance, because what the king would never do was place his throne at the Messiah's disposal. So, they told us that, upon leaving, they would tell everyone in Bethlehem that they had been mistaken, that we were not the people they were looking for, to dispel suspicion, but that it would be good for us to leave as soon as possible. They said this, graciously accepted the food and fresh water I offered them, and left as quickly as they had come. For a long time, we could hear the commotion of the crowd following them. Some tried to enter the house, but Joseph, Rasan, and the other shepherds, standing at the door, prevented them from bothering us. Night fell quickly, as it was deep winter, although the days were starting to lengthen, and with the shadows, everything returned to calm. "What will we do, Mary?" my husband asked, sitting beside me while Jesus slept in the old manger that still served as his cradle. These strange messengers of God advised us to leave as soon as possible. No matter how much they tried to mislead Herod, the king's spies must have followed them here, and it's likely that by now they have informed him of this visit. Tomorrow, or in the next few days, we could be attacked by his men. Therefore, I believe we must leave as soon as we can. We had already planned to depart, so we just need to accelerate our return to Nazareth without stopping at Elizabeth's house as we intended. I remember reassuring him and agreeing with his plans. I was so bewildered, so surprised, and deep down, so joyful, that not even if a Roman patrol had appeared at our door would I have been worried. I advised him to sleep as soon as possible and that at dawn, we would begin preparing everything to leave that very day, but the unexpected events of the journey were not over. We were already asleep when a very bright light startled us. Even the boy, who woke up but didn't cry and stared intently at what, little by little, became visible behind the light. You might think, dear John, that we were so accustomed to the appearance of angels, the oracles of venerable elders, and the visits of portentous wise men that it had become routine. It wasn't like that. Not for Joseph, nor for me, although the boy, barely a month old, didn't seem to find anything strange. The fact is that the angel knelt before Jesus' cradle and touched the ground with his face. Then, as if for the first time, he kissed my hand, and finally, with a reverent bow and voice, addressed Joseph. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you. Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." He said nothing more, and we didn't ask anything either. Everything was very clear. The only difference was that, if we had previously planned to go north, now God was telling us that it was safer for us to go south. The angel disappeared, and Joseph and I didn't doubt what he had said for an instant. In a short time, we gathered our belongings and loaded the donkey. With the boy well wrapped and close to my chest, we began our flight. We left the village in the middle of the night, but in case anyone followed us, we took the opposite direction and headed towards Jerusalem. After traveling a safe distance through shortcuts and trails, we set out for Egypt. What I felt most was not saying goodbye to our friends. Rasan and the others had been very good to us, and now we had to flee like this, without saying anything. But Joseph had silenced me when I mentioned this fact, arguing that it was better for them not to know anything about us if they were questioned by Herod's envoys. Furthermore, not all of them deserved our trust, as we saw when they led the wise men to our house. However, they would perfectly understand what had happened, for their time with Joseph after the wise men left had not been in vain. They had discussed the risk the boy ran if Herod found him. Fortunately, Joseph said, I didn't lie to them when I said this afternoon that we were planning to go to Nazareth as soon as possible, for that's what we believed we would do. The fact is that if someone asks them, that's what they'll answer, because they won't know anything else. We hardly spoke for the rest of the night. We tried to focus attentively on the path to avoid stumbling, which wasn't difficult thanks to the magnificent moon that shone in the sky. By dawn, we were far from Bethlehem, and even further when we made our first stop to eat. It was then that Joseph opened up. "I don't understand anything that's happening," he said. "I haven't understood anything from the first moment. Even though I have made efforts to accept everything and place myself at the service of the Almighty's plans. But fleeing like a criminal, in the middle of the night, that does worry me. We have been taught, Mary, that God rewards the good and punishes the bad, and that, therefore, when someone is punished, it is because they are bad. What wrong have we done to have to flee? Why doesn't the Almighty send us an army of angels to confront the Roman legions if they dare to attack His Messiah? Will this always happen? What dangers await us in this strange land where we are going and where our ancestors suffered so much? Will we have to remain there forever, and will Jesus have to return at the head of an army to liberate Israel?"
Rachel's cry.
As I had also been meditating during the long hours of travel, and my questions were similar to his, I was able to answer him somewhat. "Dear Joseph," I said, "remember that it's not for us to understand, but only to have faith. What has happened is not the result of human intelligence, but of God's plans. Our duty is to obey and follow God's will as faithfully as possible. It's true that we are like a field of reeds swayed by the wind, like a dry leaf carried here and there without being able to stop it. It's true that, for almost a year, your life and mine have changed so much that they bear no resemblance to what we had planned. But neither you nor I should have the slightest doubt that God is behind all of this, and so we must have trust, whatever happens. Regarding what you say about reward and punishment, I know that this is what is taught in all the synagogues, but it is also true that some prophets speak differently, including the story of Job, who suffered while innocent. Suffering is a mystery, and it has always seemed too easy to attribute it to God's punishment for the sins of the one who is suffering. Our son, in any case, is absolutely innocent, and yet, he was not born in the finest of palaces as he deserved. Nor does he have a court of servants at his disposal. He also cannot grow up peacefully without being threatened by countless dangers. But, in short, what I'm telling you, Joseph, are the thoughts of an inexperienced young woman like me. So, I ask you to calm down and be sure that neither in Egypt nor in any other place will God fail to protect us, even if we have to flee until the end of our days. The important thing is to save our son, and this, so far, we are managing to do." Joseph came closer to me and kissed my cheek. He did this rarely and always with great respect. But on that occasion, I felt it was a kiss from a son to his mother, as if, even though he was the man of the house and much older than me, my words had given him support and he had found in me the encouragement he was beginning to lack. The journey to Egypt was difficult. We made many stops and met many different people. We always traveled in caravans with other Jews, as commercial traffic between Alexandria and Jerusalem was constant, given that there was a considerable Jewish community in that great Egyptian city. We lived there for several years until, once again, the angel warned us that the danger had passed. The death of Herod and the struggles that broke out among his descendants caused our case to be forgotten, and we could return without danger. In any case, as Archelaus, Herod's son, was ruling in Judea, we took a long detour without even passing through Jerusalem and settled in Galilee, in our beloved Nazareth. That it was on the way back, however, while traveling in a caravan from Gaza to Jerusalem, that we learned everything that had happened after our departure from Bethlehem. Joseph sometimes participated in the gatherings that were organized at night around the campfire. The story they were telling that day caught his attention, and he quickly came to tell it to me. They were discussing the latest political events, Herod's difficult legacy, and the last years of this bloodthirsty king. One of the speakers, to emphasize his cruelty, said that, for years before his death and while Herod was very worried about his succession, 3 wise men from Babylon had arrived in Jerusalem in search of the Messiah. According to these astrologers, He had been born, and they believed they could find him in the king's palace, as was logical. As Herod had not had any sons for some time, despite the large number of concubines, he acknowledged that it was not in his house that the Messiah had been born. He plotted the death of the wise men but first sent them in search of the one who, according to prophecy, would be the liberator of Israel, because if his existence reached the ears of the people, he would become a serious rival to inheriting his kingdom, dethroning his sons. The fact is that the wise men managed to evade the surveillance of his spies, and he only learned that the birth had occurred in Bethlehem.
As there were many people in that town because of the Roman census, it was very difficult to know who had been born there and who had not. It was also not known how long ago the boy had been born, as the wise men had not specified his age, although they said with certainty that he was a young child. Herod demonstrated his cruelty by ordering his soldiers to kill all the boys under 2 years old in Bethlehem and the surrounding area to ensure that he would not leave alive the one they said was the Messiah. This, the narrator concluded, was one of his last acts, and years later, he would die suffering horrific pain. Another narrator, who also knew the history of Judea like no one else, recalled that some wise men from Jerusalem, upon learning of the horrific news of the massacre of the children, cited an oracle of the prophet Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. No one knows, the narrator said, if Herod succeeded in his intention to kill the Messiah. Probably yes, they concluded, because nothing more had been heard of him. Joseph said nothing and simply listened. After a while, he got up and returned to the tent where I was waiting for him with the boy, who was now 5 years old. No one suspected that we were the protagonists of the story. Everyone saw us as a family returning to Israel after having been in Egypt to make their fortune, a fortune that, of course, was none other than the splendid gifts that the wise men had left us when they departed and which, wisely managed by my husband, allowed us not only to survive in Egypt but also to settle in Nazareth with some comfort. Neither Joseph nor I could hold back our tears when he recounted the story he had just heard by the campfire. We thought of the boys of the village who had perished at the hands of the tyrant and also of the possible fate of some of our friends, if they were brutally interrogated by Herod's henchmen in search of clues about our whereabouts. And all for what? We asked ourselves. At that moment, our son woke up. He raised his head and asked why we were crying. He soon got up, came to us, and began to cover us with kisses. I embraced him in a mixture of fear and tenderness. We dried our tears and prepared to move forward. The reason for what had happened was right there in that 5-year-old boy who made everyone happy without knowing the gift he possessed and by which everyone felt strangely drawn. The reason was, primarily, in the wickedness of men, in their refusal to accept God's plans. It was the sin that my son had come to defeat and that, in its last gasps, was striking terrible blows, harming the just and the unjust alike, just as the sun shines on the evil and the good. Was God to blame? Was God responsible for the evil in the world and the sin of men for having made them free? Was God ultimately the one to blame for the slaughter of the innocents by setting in motion the process of redemption with the birth of my son? No, God had done everything well, from the creation of the world to the conception of my son, including creating us in his image and likeness. It was we who used that freedom to turn against him and against ourselves. And now it was God again, who wanted to intervene in history to give us a new opportunity. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be easy to achieve it, because the evil one would not abandon the conquered territory without a fierce fight.